And the United Nations is reminding the world that it belongs to all of us. It is Palmyra. We've been talking about it this morning, the ruins of an ancient civilization in the Syrian desert, now under the control of ISIS. That is ratcheting up fears for security of the World Heritage Site. And our senior correspondent, Susan Ormiston, is looking into this. You're going to see her reports all through the day and leading up to the National tonight, giving me some time this morning. Good to see you on this. Thank you very much. It's so interesting. I mean, the significance, not only do we see ISIS for the first time wresting control of a city from both Syrian and allied forces, so that's a significant starting point, but taking control of Palmyra with its strategic and military value. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, I don't think we can overestimate the significance of this event overnight and into today. We're hearing that ISIS has taken control of most, if not all, of the city of Palmyra, and it is telling residents to not hide soldiers in their homes. For ISIS, this is a big win. They drove the Syrian forces out yesterday. This is a strategic point on the map leading to the highway that goes towards Damascus. It also is in an area of gas fields around Palmyra. So according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights in London, ISIS now controls half of Syria's landmass. Now, that's not the most important part of Syria. The big cities, Damascus, for example, have not been breached at all. But in terms of actual territory, it's creeping up to the halfway mark in Syria. So for them, this is a big win. And of course, also, this is a cultural, emotional place for Syrians and really for all of the Middle East.
Well, and indeed, if we look at Palmyra for the world, because this is partly why the world is paying attention to this, in that here's this ancient civilization, a World Heritage Site, now at risk.
Yes, the fears are, as you know, is that ISIS will repeat what it's done in Iraq, in places like Mosul, which had taken bulldozers and hammers to antiquities that are thousands of years old. You know, Palmyra is on the country's currency. It's a tourist destination. Prior to the war, thousands of people went there. It's a beautiful city that is a real combination of architecture dating back to the 1st century. This is just outside the city, and so far we don't know that anything has happened to those antiquities, but people who've watched the pattern of ISIS doing this believe that they are at threat. They're exposed, they're not protected now, and they're waiting really with dread in their hearts about what could happen here. We heard from the chief of antiquities in Syria this morning saying that he has lost all hope, that this is the end of civilization, that this point in the globe will be overrun and destroyed, and they're very, very worried about that. And yesterday, I spoke to an archaeologist at the Royal Ontario Museum here in Toronto who spent almost 20 years excavating in Syria. He's been to Palmyra many times, and he talked about it. He said, "This is like my child being butchered. I cannot watch this happen." He said, "You know, these will never be recovered." His name is Clemens Reichel, and here's a little bit of what he had to say.
Okay.
It's their treasure, indeed, and it's on the country's currency. It's the center point. It's really, in a way, the geographic center of Syria. So I cannot begin to imagine how most people in Syria must feel about this. We hear about the deaths and the destruction, and I think rightly so. We have to focus on the human tragedy. But I think it's trivial to say that we're talking about the destruction of a few pretty stones, as I've read in comments. This is more than that. Culture is not reduced to a few stones. It doesn't grow back. What's gone, it's gone.
Oh, wow. It doesn't grow back.
It doesn't. And Clemens Reichel told me that these days he feels more like an undertaker than an archaeologist.
Isn't that? My goodness, he really does capture so eloquently what's at stake here. So what to do? I mean, we have the head of UNESCO, the Director General, today calling for a ceasefire immediately. Will the Syrian forces stop? Will ISIS stop fighting? It seems unlikely. So what do you do to protect antiquities in a conflict zone?
Well, the military solution is out of control of people like Clemens Reichel and most of us. But what he's saying in the large picture is, number one, we have to be more diligent about protecting and documenting archaeological sites. Know what things are there so that if they're looted, they can be traced. Number two, you can't go and buy antiquities on the market. He said, many people say, well, let's buy them up, let's get them out of this area. He said, if you're buying antiquities from this region today, you're buying stolen goods. It's pure and simple. So that is not the solution either. He says, ultimately, we need to look at the preservation of places like this. It's cultural genocide if they are destroyed, that this needs to be seen as a war crime with that kind of importance. And that's kind of the top-level diplomatic solution that he sees he wants in the future. But today, it's very desperate.